Let's just jump into the first article we have here from January 4th by a man named Stephen Marche.
Oh.
The next U.S. Civil War is already here. We just refuse to see it. I saw this. It's tagged by The Guardian, the far right. Oh. And as I was reading it, there are some things in it that I was like, okay, I don't know if I agree with that. I think you talk about voter suppression and things like that. I think it's one of the issues. But I was as I was getting into it and talking about how we've got these, a potential political assassination attempt. That's not necessarily like a left-right thing with this Black Lives Matter activist. It just shows that there's extremism emerging in this country. But of course, you also have serious things over the past several years, like Charlottesville, where there's just clashes in the street.
Yes.
So let's just start from the beginning, though. You wrote a book, The Next Civil War. This article is titled, The Next U.S. Civil War is Already Here.
I don't write the headlines.
You didn't write that?
Yeah.
So do you think that it is likely? Is it your opinion, or is it a journalist's assessment?
Well, the book is really based on the best available models. Like that's how I did it. I tried to keep myself out of it as much as possible. So the leading experts that Foreign Policy did a survey, like their number was a 67% chance of a civil war. That also coincides with polls about average Americans think how likely they think a civil war is. So I feel with this stuff you don't need to exaggerate. It's so scary anyway that what I wanted to do in the book was be as precise as possible, right, and use the best available evidence that I could. So there's a process underway in the United States is a textbook case of a country headed for civil war on a number of fronts, and it's not one thing. It's actually what they call a complex cascading system. So it's things feeding into each other. So on one hand, it's political illegitimacy. On the other hand, it's effects of climate change. On the other hand, it's the levels of inequality, which are at unprecedented levels, literally levels that haven't been seen since 1776. And all of these things contribute to each other and factor into each other. And that's why the United States is kind of in a unique position, because all these things are happening in the rest of the world as well, but it's the way that they feed into each other that creates such a dangerous situation for the United States.
Are there specific things that you found factored across multiple potentials that you just kept showing up? Like, this is one of these things that it seems to be in all these scenarios.
Well, there are a few ones that are big. Like, I don't really separate them out because I do think they feed into each other. But like the decline of faith of institutions. So the fact that only 20% of Americans believe their electoral system is fair, that's right. That's a condition that's just ripe for civil war. The fact that 33% of Americans think that it's okay to use violence if your side loses, and that's equal Democrat Republican. Like they're very similar. One's 32% and one's 36%, right? So that is a huge factor. So that's a big one.
I'm curious how much of that is honest. And what I mean by that
is... these models are all of different strengths. Yeah. So like all I can do is tell you what they say.
For sure. So I think, just leaping off from there, we have the story about the Black Lives Matter activist accused, allegedly shooting this Democrat. Certainly there have been instances where far right and right-wing groups have engaged in violence. But if you look at institutional support, when it comes to, say, Black Lives Matter in 2020, you get Kamala Harris soliciting donations to bail out rioters. You have a Black Lives Matter activist who's arrested for the attempted assassination of a politician, and Black Lives Matter fronts $100,000 to bail him out. You don't have that same kind of thing on the right.
Well, let me answer that question in two ways. Okay, so the first thing is that the process that Civil War experts talk about, and this happens all over the world, it happens in Chile, it happened in other places that had Civil War, is called complementary radicalization. So what you have is left-wing groups or right-wing groups taking extremist positions, and this causes people on the other side to get more radical. So that's an area that transcends, partisanship. Like that's a process that's underway.
Yeah.
Where
definitely,
as things get more extreme on the left, they get more extreme on the right. That causes the left to get more extreme. That then causes the right to get more extreme. Right. And so that's a very toxic process that is extremely hard to escape from. Now, the other thing I would say is that when I talk to this is just, let me just give you this perspective. You can take it or leave it. It might be useful to you, it might not be. But when I talk to like members of secret services of other countries and they're thinking about what a collapsing America looks like, they're not really afraid of the left, because the left is inherently self-defeating. It is much less organized than the right. It's much less effective as a group. So like when you look at a group like the Oath Keepers, they have it together. Like they have it together in a way. Whereas when you look at left-wing institutions, like the Women's March after the Trump inauguration, it had somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people at its opening rally. It imploded in internecine politics almost instantly. And like the term woke institution basically doesn't exist because they eat themselves, right? So all I would say is like both these processes are underway, but I would say that when I talked to experts on civil war from other countries and people who are worried about the stability of the United States, it was definitely far-right extremists that were their primary worry.
What about the institutionalization?
Well, hold on. I wanted to address this real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think you're wrong, but the way I see it is the right I would describe as sharp, the left I would describe as blunt. Black Lives Matter was able to raise, tens of millions of dollars for relatively nebulous causes, but that attracted thousands of people to riot in the streets over 2020. The damage caused was severe, and it did result in a lot of death, but it was very, very widespread. So typically what we see a lot of, especially at the start of Donald Trump's run for the presidency, I was actually on the ground at a lot of these Trump rallies, you see blunt level terrorism. It never exceeded it was political violence.
Terrorism to me is a technical term that would not apply to that. I mean, in terms of this book, like terrorism is very specific. Like it has very specific consequences and has very specific. I'm not to say that we're not dealing with political violence.
Well, I'm just saying political violence.
Yeah, political violence to me is a better term.
So the political violence you'd see on the left would be rampant but low scale. So there'd be a lot of instances of someone getting punched in the face, or someone getting pushed in the street, or people running around and knocking over garbage cans. It was incessant. It was never rising to the point where, for a lot of it, people were losing their lives until I think the riots. But we've seen riots in the past.
But see, to me, like as an outsider, like who's right and who's wrong, and the nature of the violence is less important to me than the stability of the system. Right, like as a Canadian up north, like wanting America to hold on so that we can trade with you, like what I'm concerned with is the stability of the system. So, like when defund the police happened, right, maybe the worst political idea of. Well, I mean, it's a high bar.
Now I'm on board with it.
But keep it going. We love it for electoral purposes. Keep supporting.
Right, but also completely non-doable and in support.
They did, though.
Yeah.
Well, they did in one place. They couldn't get it achieved anywhere else. They got it in Minnesota, and then where else?
I think 260 departments had their budgets slashed.
And then they came back right
Not
away.
all of them.
I mean,
but a lot of them did come back.
Yeah, or Chaz, right? Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which is probably the number one example of left-wing resistance to federal authority. I mean, that is a subject in the book, but it's really very little. It has very little impact when compared to the militias.
So what are the militias like? So I can name a ton of things like Chaz, the Chaz Chop. That was in Seattle. Then you also had the Portland attempts. You had the occupation in Minneapolis.
The Oath Keeper list. I mean, they have obviously January 6th. I mean, would be at the top of the list. But as a very highly destabilizing action. But like the other thing about the right is that they understand the importance of institutions in a way that the left does not. This is, you understand, I'm not judging. I'm just saying.
No, I agree.
Like when you look at the Oath Keeper list, like when it came out with that 40,000 names, like they'd infiltrated very deeply into police departments, into school boards. Like when I talked to Michael German, who was an undercover agent with the FBI and far right movements, he was like, once they discovered I had no tattoos, they were like, "You're never going to talk to anyone rough ever again. We're going to run you on a school board." Like that's what we're going to do.
What I mean to say, and just because I want to make sure I can let Daniel come in, is
it's all good.
I think the one of the reasons there's a lot of people who don't think that the far right elements, many people on the right don't think that there's a big threat from them because they don't see it a lot.
Right.
The way to describe it is it's sharp versus the left's blunt. You know, I think you're right when you say that they know the importance of institutions. The right talks about losing institutional control all the time. What the left doesn't understand, what they have is numbers. People will go out in the street and march and smash things, but a day later, where are those activists?
Yes, and they have no policy. Like
Right.
they have their policy ideas are unfeasible. Well, that's generally true. I mean, I think like that's true of the left and the right.
Yeah.
Well, what's happening in America is it's entering a post-policy phase. The government can. I mean, this is the other thing we talked about. You asked like, what are the major causes? Like, one is this decline in institutions, but it's also that the government is America is essentially becoming ungovernable, right? Like it no like Biden has spent 11 months getting diplomats in place. Right, the U.S. government is constantly threatening to renege on its debt. I mean, that's playing Russian roulette with all of this, all of this prosperity.
The Federal Reserve is ungoverned. They've never audited it.
There is a huge number of ungovernable. Well, you know, to me, like as a Canadian, when you look at the big Build Back Better bill or whatever it's called, that's a budget. That's a Wednesday in a mature democracy. Like you just pass a budget and that's it. In the United States, those basic functions of government are increasingly impossible or extremely difficult. And that leads naturally to a politics of rage, right? Where it's like, because you can't ever enact policy, whether you're left or right, you become so, everything becomes aesthetic. Everything becomes an aesthetic, artistic gesture of your own anger and your own beliefs in a concept that transcends essentially, you know, real actions, real government actions. And that's a huge, to me, that's maybe the number one factor.
Yeah, people think they're supposed to be creating policy. They should be stripping away bad policy right now.
When I hear American politicians, like think tanks and so on, say like, we have to do this with the tax rate, we have to, yeah.
No, I'm saying pull up your mic.
Sorry.
I was trying to stop you.
Like when I hear them talking about policy like parental leave or something, it's like, you guys you can barely pass a budget. Why are you even having these conversations about parental leave or whatever? Like you're in a system that is increasingly non-functional. And the thing is, like, you know, one of the most important models in the book is that like that is only going to increase.
Dude, I was watching Canadian Parliament go nuts and people were heckling basically. I was like, in an American court, you would be thrown out if you heckled.
Well, have you ever seen the British one?
That's like it's like a holdover from British. Like even the speaker was like, "You guys, cut it out." Like they're trying to it's 21st century. We're adults. Don't scream over each other.
They're definitely not adults.
They come from like British Parliament where they're trying to interrupt the guy speaking. They're trying to disrupt him. And
British Parliament is one of the great entertainments of all time.
What do they call it? The questions session or something?
Well, the
Friday
thing is,
questions.
like,
it's wonderful.
The question period, like the point of a parliamentary system, as opposed to the American system, is that there's a concept of the loyal opposition. So your job is to attack the government, where you think they're right or not.
And that's just when they're like,
right.
Like, want to talk?
So and that creates an environment where you know, every leader has to be humiliated. Like every leader, every politician, everyone's just a servant. Right, and that's just a completely different condition in the United States.
Yeah, I don't know if we lost the point you were trying to make before, Daniel.
No, I think it's worth bringing back, not just because it's my point, but I think it touches on what you were saying of institutions. So you mentioned the Oath Keepers, and we were also talking about Black Lives Matter in the sense of institutional dysfunction, and how I love that you said the right sees institutions as inherently necessary.
Well, that's
or valuable.
Well, as opportunities for advancement of their own program.
Okay,
like that's both sides now are destroying institutions.
Well, absolutely. But
right.
One of the things that I'm curious about is when you take a group that is, I think, incredibly polemic and that does cause a lot of division, which is something like Black Lives Matter, institutionally, they're golden, right? You have Bank of America who writes them checks. You have the NBA. You have major institutions that support what I think is a purely political entity, but it is held up to this level. And I think that causes a lot of rage because the Oath Keepers, regardless of what you think of them, would Bank of America ever write them a check? They probably couldn't even get a loan at Bank of America. So I think there's institutions have chosen sides, and I think that's leading to a greater level of the division.
Well, the money in American politics is really confusing because, like, for example, like you saw the New York Times article about dark money that came out like a week ago. Like, I mean, that to me is the most appalling story in American politics that I know of, where the money that $2.4 billion that decided the 2020 election, no one knows where it came from. Some of it came from foreign sources for sure, but nobody knows where it came from. Now, 1.5 billion went to the Democrats and 900,000 went to the Republicans. So
900 million?
Sorry, 900 million. Yeah. Did I say billion?
Billion. You said 900,000 went to the Democrats.
Right. My Canadian small-time politics stuff. But that's and so you and then there's the other fact that, like, while Republicans are pro-business and so on, like 70% of American GDP comes from Biden voting counties. That seems to me like one of the key facts that's going to determine the future of this country in civil war or out of it or at the end of it. And so, like, I think there's that I will acknowledge I find it confusing. Like where money goes to, where is coming from, like what it is supporting and what it wants.
I find it confusing that certain political causes are objectively they're accepted to receive money or to be on the board or write a check to, and others are not, because those causes are aligning more and more.
Well, the Koch
towards
brothers wrote
beliefs.
a lot of checks. I mean, the Koch brothers wrote a
Coke.
check.
No, they do. No, they do, absolutely. But I mean, but you're never going to go to a Knicks game and at the halftime show have them give a $500,000 check to this political cause. But you will see it for something like Black Lives Matter. You will see it for something like Planned Parenthood. You will see. So the philanthropy of politics, I think, has become very, very divisive because certain philanthropic groups are tolerable and others are not.
And real quick, it's only one Koch brother. The other passed.
Sure, right.
But just I thought that was relevant.
Well, I think they also stopped giving money to political causes too, like a few years ago. Like I think they give it to like reform things. They just decided they're not doing partisan politics anymore.
There are a lot of wealthy individuals that are willing to fund either side. Peter Thiel's
got
a lot of money and infrastructure.
I mean, the point is really not who is giving money to who. The point is, like, all this money is destroying the system and making it inherently unstable. And there's also the politicization of everything, which is where you have homophobic chicken and you have LGBTQ positive cookies,
Oreos or something.
Where literally every aspect of life is politicized. That also is classic prelude to civil war.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Now, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.